Welcome to Disney A History, a podcast where we discuss the history of different Disney characters and their impact on pop culture throughout the ages. My name is Lauren, and along with my co-host Abby, we thank you for joining us on this magical adventure. On this episode of Disney A History, we will be discussing Cinderella. We will cover her original fairy tale, the Disney adaptation, and finally, her impact on pop culture. All right, we're going to start off with the history of Cinderella. So, okay, I knew that she had a very rich history, but I didn't realize how rich of a history it really was because almost every single culture around the globe has a version in some way, shape, or form of Cinderella. And I think that is just one of the coolest things about doing research on her was to find all of these different variations of her story, which some of the motifs were a little bit different, but overall had the same overarching message. So the purpose of her story was to teach that kindness and goodness will be rewarded while jealousy and greed will be punished. And there are over 3,000 variations of her story, which is just completely mind-blowing. I think that is so cool. Okay, so the oldest recorded version of the story is the Chinese version, and it's called Ye Shen. I looked the pronunciation up from a native speaker, so if I'm saying it wrong, feel free to correct me, but I'm pretty sure it's correct. And it was recorded before 221 BC. So somewhere before that, because it was like before a couple of the dynasties took place. So it's a very, very old story. There is also a Native American version called The Rough-Faced Girl. And I read this one in college, I think. I think one of my classmates did their project on it and read it to us. So I was a little bit familiar, like when I was reading up on it, I was like, okay, I think I've read this one before. And I had. And it's a little bit, I think it's the most different from all the versions. She's forced by her own two sisters to tend to a fire, and there's like this invisible man spirit thing looking for a wife. And she gets chosen because her heart is pure. But she has scars and stuff from tending the fire all the time. And then once the spirit recognizes her goodness, she becomes beautiful after she bathes in a lake, and like all the scarring and stuff disappears. And there's also a West African version of Cinderella called Chinye, and it's a little bit different too, but for the most part it has the same motifs. Like the animals protect her, but instead of like a fairy, there's an old lady that tells her about a gourd. She tells her to get the smallest gourd, and then she goes home and breaks the gourd, and all these jewels pop out. Her stepsister finds out and goes to the place where she got the gourd and gets the largest one, and a storm breaks out. Step family leaves town, and Chinye stays to help care for the village with her wealth that came from the gourd. So kindness and goodness prevail once again. There's an English version. It's called Tattercoats. It's a little bit different in the fact that she lives with her grandfather, and then it has a lot of like story similarities to the movie Ever After with Drew Barrymore. I feel like Ever After probably pulled from several different stories for this one, which I think is super cool because they're like honoring like several different Cinderella tales. Yeah, if you've seen Ever After, then you've pretty much seen Tattercoats or read Tattercoats. It's not identical, but it's very close.
A really interesting thing about the Grimm version is that the stepsisters, to fit into the glass slipper, had to cut off a part of their foot. So one of them cut off their toes, and the prince was like, "Oh my goodness, you're my princess." And then later realizes that she's bleeding, and is like, "Ooh, you tricked me." So then he goes back and tries the shoe on the other sister. And so to make her foot fit, she cuts off her heel. And then he's like, "Oh my goodness, I found my princess for real this time." And then again finds out that she's bleeding. And is like, "Oh shucks, I found the wrong princess again." And finally gets to Cinderella, and she magically fits the shoe. There's also a lot of other interesting things, and I encourage you to go read it. But there's also another one that I really liked from an Alaskan version of the story. and she is relatable to a salmon in the fact that her dress is transformed under her fingers when she picks up a salmon, and then her dress magically forms in her hands in the colors of a silvery greenish lavender blue that shimmers like a salmon, which is very interesting because I would never think to compare a princess with a fish, but it's also very Alaskan. I also thought it was interesting that her description of her eyes was a beautiful smoky color and it just sounds so pretty, a nice lovely gray. They're just so pretty because they change with every outfit. But another one that I really liked that I read into was an Irish version of Cinderella, and this one is basically the same storyline except we flip flop it. Cinderella is the one looking for her prince because the prince, with his magical bowl, helps defeat a dragon and rescues this princess. And then he loses his boot as he's fleeing, and she has to go and find the owner of this large boot.
But the girl's not called Cinderella, is she?
No, because he's Cinderlad. It's just easier to call her Cinderella because that's what she normally is. She's the princess, and he's basically nothing, but she's looking for him. So another version I found was from Greece, and her mother, well, her stepmother was so mean that she ended up counting every single drop of water that Cinderella drank. It's like, the girl's just trying to live, and you're counting every little minuscule thing. So harsh. It's the pettiest petty thing I've heard. There's petty, and then there's petty.
The version thought to be the oldest version was called the Egyptian version, but it actually originated from a Greek historian named Strabo, and he was from 65 BCE to 23 CE. So the Chinese version is older than that. So it was debunked as being the oldest version. But the version that we're most familiar with is what Disney actually used to create their animated film. And it is by Charles Perrault. He was a French author and historian. He actually went to school to be a lawyer, very similar to the Grimm brothers. And this version was the most kind and lighthearted version. And he wrote it because during the 1600s, when he was a part of the French court, the it was very popular for the courtesans to share fairy tales with each other, and they were very popular inside the French court. So he actually started recording these and published some books off of the tales that he heard from all of the wealthy French people. Ooh la la. And I think that leads us directly into our Disney section. All right. So we can talk about the art and animation of actually, you know what? Let's start off with the plot this time. Let's twist it up. So since we talked about Charles Perrault's version, how Walt used it, we can talk about that and discuss how it's similar. So the main like there's actually a controversy that we need to talk about in the original like telling of it, because it could have either been a glass slipper or a fur slipper, because he recorded these because of oral tradition, and the word for fur and glass was ver or ver. So it could have been fur or glass. Fur sounds more comfortable, but glass sounds more of like a shocking like timepiece or like timeless article of clothing that is more special than a fur slipper.
Yeah, because anyone can wear a fur slipper, but glass shoes are probably very uncomfortable, so not many people would have them. Plus, all the time it would take to make one shoe and then try to make an identical one. Glass is not easy to work with, so it's probably fur for like if it was a real person wearing it. But for this magical moment when Cinderella walks into the ball and stuff, like it's definitely supposed to be glass.
Right.
In my mind, anyways.
Yeah. Even things as small as her having to go save Gus from a cage is in Charles Perrault's version. I thought that was really cute. It's like she even goes to save the plump mouse from the mouse trap, and she like freaks out and is like, "Oh my gosh, we have to go save him quickly." So it's like literally almost identical to the movie, which is really cool.
It also means that they did their research, but they weren't super creative with it. They put all their creativity into the animation of it.
Well, the music too. Yeah, because definitely didn't carry on music through this, but yeah. And they still changed up a couple of things, but for the most part, if you read Charles Perrault's version, you're pretty much reading what Disney used. And they actually like went back and forth on different versions to use because they were going to use the Grimm version. They were like, "Yeah, we have to change it too much. Like, we can't really use this because it's nasty, y'all. It's nasty." Like, I don't even like the Grimm brothers anymore after this because it's like all these magical, lighthearted versions of the story with a magical fish and wishbone, and then there's freaking cutting your foot off to fit it in a shoe. Like, and that's one of the last versions. So it's like, you know, what your reference point was Charles Perrault, and then you did this, like, I don't know. And they claim the Grimm brothers claim to have never have changed anything that they heard that were told to them, but historians don't believe them, which I think is funny.
I really liked how in the Disney version of Cinderella, she gets her fairy godmother by being super faithful to herself and keeping positive and being a good person. But in the Grimm's version of it, she like cries over her mother's grave every day, and then like because of that, the fairy godmother is able to come to her. Like her wishes come true. But I like how it's because she's a good person that she's able to get her wishes in Disney's version.
Right, because the fairy godmother makes a point to say, "I wouldn't be here if you didn't have the faith for it."
Yeah, and I thought that made it tie into the whole like moral lesson of like being a good person.
Another kind of historical tie-in is a reference that Disney decided to make in the movie when she was naming Gus. She goes, "We'll name you Octavian, but Gus for short," and that's a reference to Caesar Augustus and how his name was Octavius or Octavian before he became Caesar Augustus, which I thought I like. I learned like I'd watched Cinderella growing up, and then in eighth grade we had world history, and we were talking about Caesar Augustus and his name being Octavian, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I get the joke, Gus Gus, that's hilarious!" As a historian or amateur historian, I'm not a professional historian by any means, but as someone that appreciates history, I appreciated that joke. So, okay, so now we can talk about the animation. And one of Walt's favorite pieces of animation that was ever created while he was living was the animation of Cinderella's dress transformation, which honestly is like, why wouldn't that be your favorite piece of animation? It's pretty amazing and astonishing to watch. I wonder what he would have thought of the transformation on the stage production of Frozen. I think that's pretty cool. I mean, I think they do it on in the stage versions of Cinderella too, but the way
Yeah,
they do it in the Frozen Broadway show was really cool.
yeah, the way they do it in the Cinderella play is that it's kind of like all bunched up into her apron, and then she ends up spinning around when the fairy godmother says "bippy boppy boo," and she unlatches it and it falls down. I'm not sure how the top works. It's been a while since I've seen it, but it's a very magical moment because she's spinning, and usually they can spin fast enough where your eye doesn't catch the moment where the dress falls. So it's really magical to see.
Yeah, I love stage productions that are able to do tricks of the eye like that.
So actually, when the movie first starts, you see Cinderella waking up at 6 a.m., and you can tell that because the clock dings 6 times. And this roughly places the movie into June. And the way you can tell this is because that in France, where this takes place, it would be around the summer solstice time that the sun's position would light up a room like that in mid June. So it's just really cool. And another side fact to even prove this point further is that a pumpkin would be grown to about 20 to 40 pounds in this time of year.
Oh, that is really cool.
Yeah, like you look at the pumpkin in the scene where she's getting her coach, that would be roughly the size if you put it in scale to her and the mice around it.
Oh my gosh. That is such a fun fact.
It's a little fact that no one would ever notice unless you're really good at looking up at the sun and seeing what time it is.
Yeah, props to whoever found or like took the time out of their life to calculate the time that Cinderella took place in the animated version.
But I wonder what animator put all that time to figure out what size the pumpkin should be. Like, where should the light be hidden at this moment of time? I'm like, it's so cool that they put in that much thought into this movie.
And they may not have even thought of it. They just did it
Accidentally did
and it
it.
happened by accident. Yeah. Guess we'll never know. And something that is cool about this movie, I guess, is the 9 old men all worked on this movie as well. There was only a handful where all 9 of them were together, and this was one of them. And I think that's really cool. They were all train lovers and loved fairy tales, I suppose. Okay, and now let's talk about some fun character and actor facts.
So, a cool thing to know is that the wife of the Disney layout artist Ken O'Connor, he based his real life wife, Mary Alice O'Connor, as the inspiration for the fairy godmother. And there's actually a little mini documentary that's about 11 minutes long on Disney Plus if you look under the extras category.
Oh, that's awesome. I love when they put the little extras under the different movies because that was the reason why I would buy different versions because like they would release the DVD and then the Blu-ray and they would always add them extra bonus features and I was like, I need the commentary. Another fact about one of the actresses is that the narrator, when the movie first starts and she's telling us about Cinderella and her father, the actress, the voice actress that does that, is actually played by the same actress that does the voice of Cruella Deville in 101 Dalmatians, which I think is so funny because like her voice is super calming as the narrator, and then I mean, as Cruella, she's like, "Rah!" And I'm like, sis, girl, you talented. So the way Eileen Woods got her part uh, as Cinderella is she was friends with the songwriters, and they asked her to help with the demo. And when Walt heard her on the demo, he like was like, that's her. Like I need her to hire her. I need to hire her to do Cinderella because she's the one." So she was really shocked that that happened because demo people never get the parts like that. So it was really special. Another fun fact is Eleanor Audley, that played Lady Tremaine, actually did the voice of Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty and Madame Leota on the Haunted Mansion attraction that was originally built in Disneyland in California, and then later on they used the same recordings for the Haunted Mansion at Disney World in Orlando.
One sad fact is that Eileen, the voice of Cinderella, she came down with Alzheimer's in her old age. And a uplifting part of the story is that the nurses would play A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes for her when she started to get agitated, and it would calm her down instantly.
Yeah, that's really sad.
It's sad, but at least they knew what song to play or like anything to do to like help her reach a point in her memory that was more common than whatever point in time she was at.
And Eileen actually revealed in an interview in 1995 that in 1950, when the film was released, she took her daughter Stephanie, who was 3 at the time, to the premiere, and Stephanie screamed, "My mommy is Cinderella!" And two old ladies that were sitting behind them turned to each other and said, "Oh, isn't that sweet? She thinks her mother is Cinderella." Little did they know that that was actually the voice actress sitting in front of them.
If only they knew, they probably would have been so shocked to realize it.
I know, like, "Can you sign my ticket stub?" That's what I would have asked.
I would have asked the daughter too.
Oh, that would have been sweet. That's like creating a magical moment at Disney World.
I mean, if you're gonna ask the mother, you might as well make her feel special too.
And now is a good time to talk about the music. I adore the soundtrack. It's not one that I want to listen to on repeat necessarily as a whole. Cinderella, you know, the Cinderella.
Yeah.
I don't want to listen to that on repeat, but every once in a while I do like to listen to it. But I think I could listen to A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes all the time.
I find myself singing that one a lot, just like randomly throughout the day.
Yeah.
And then whenever I'm cleaning, I'll start humming the um the cleaning song.
Yeah. And a fun fact about Sing Sweet Nightingale is that Eileen was in the studio recording it and Walt was there as well. And he like had this blank look on his face and she was like, I don't know what to do. Like, am I like, is this bad? I don't understand. And then he like just like kind of word vomited his vision that he had for the animation for it. And he was telling her, like, I see Cinderella cleaning the floor, and as the bubbles from the water are coming up, there's another Cinderella in the bubble singing a harmony, and then another bubble with another Cinderella, which is what we see in the movie. Is like she was in the middle of singing it, and he was like, I have an idea. I have an idea. Will you fly me up there? And so that was how he got the idea for that gorgeous animation. And actually, like, because I had learned this fact before my rewatch for the podcast, and as I was watching it, I just got chills thinking about like the revelation of him picturing how this animation is going to go and how beautiful it looks with the song and the harmonies, and just like I'm gonna cry thinking about it again. I don't even know why I'm getting emotional. Like it's not emotional, it's just beautiful. But I love sunsets, and that's kind of like a vibe. And the bubbles have rainbows in them, so I just love colors, okay?
It's such a beautiful scene. And I like how they actually transition from going from the stepsisters starring out the song in their like really bad singing voice and the bad flute playing, and then they transition seamlessly into Cinderella's perfect singing. And it's just really beautiful on its own audibly, but then like the visual effects, it's a great scene.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing about the music that I noticed by watching all three Cinderellas is that the first one has like a lot of different sounds to it, whereas the second one and third one, it sounds like it's the same girl singing all the songs. Like they all the songs just sounded very similar each time it broke into a scene where there's no talking, you could just hear the girl singing.
If we're gonna talk about the second and third movies, like I know that a Cinderella 2 or Cinderella 2 came out like in the 2000s, but the voice being so different, like even as a kid, I noticed it and I was like off put by it. I was kind of an I mean, obviously they couldn't get the same one, and even if they
Yeah.
did, like her voice would have been more mature. But I don't know, it's just you couldn't find someone that was a little closer? I don't know. There are plenty of people that can like copy people. I don't know.
And then they went the extra mile and changed Cinderella's hair from strawberry blonde to like a light blonde.
Mm, okay, can I go on a rant about how they changed the princesses' dresses for like the Disney princess merchandise? Because I hate it. I absolutely hate the like swirly filigree stuff they put on the dresses. Just, and in the movie, Snow White's dress is like a tan color almost. Sometimes it looks yellow, but most of the time it looks tan on the bottom. And I'm like, y'all made it bright, bright yellow. And then y'all made Cinderella's silver dress blue. And it's just like, why did you need the extra designs on there? Like, I guess I'm a purist and I'm just annoyed by it.
Yeah, the yellow doesn't make sense to me, but with Cinderella's dress going from a silvery color to blue, I kind of understand that change and the fact that they didn't want it to look like her wedding dress. And the people that aren't like detail oriented wouldn't pick up on the fact that it's not white, it's silver.
Yeah.
So I can see that one, but like all the filigree stuff, that I don't like that change.
And I mean, I'm sure there's other costumes that bother me too, but those are the ones that stand out right now because that's who we're talking about. But we can talk about how the timelines for the second and third films do not make sense. The second one takes place in like Anastasia has this whole redemption arc, and then the third one comes along and Anastasia's bitter.
So my theory on the timeline is that we we base it on the Lion King timeline where it's Lion King the first one, the second one, and then one and a half because we're supposed to erase the whole second movie and like half of the first movie, but that doesn't match up entirely. So I think that we need to switch it to the third movie being Cinderella one and a half. And then that way, everything that happens in Cinderella 2 still makes sense and falls in a lot better, especially where Cinderella 3 in the titles on the end cap, you can see a picture of Anastasia with the bread maker, so it just flows so much better if they labeled it Cinderella one and a half.
I concur. It's like everyone that worked on Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time, which is actually a really good, solid film, but because the timeline for the second one and that one clash, it's just like, did you not watch it? And like, Anastasia is a good and then she's like I mean, she still has a redemption in the 3rd one, but, like, I don't know, I just you coulda done a little more research on that, Disney.
But like the redemption on the third one is more flimsy than the second one, which is a pretty solid redemption. Like she stands up against the stepmother very strongly. And so if you switch it, I can see how she'd fluctuate in the third one to going back to being not so nice and then going back to nice because it takes time to change. And if you're not fully committed, you're not going to stick to the change.
Right.
So I still think it makes sense if you switch the order.
Mhm. Missed opportunity.
No one asked us.
If they're listening to this podcast, they totally asked. They asked for our rants, okay? Filigree is bad. No, I'm just kidding. Not in general, but adding it to established princesses doesn't make sense, y'all. It just doesn't.
Sometimes the filigree on the dresses just makes it look more tacky. It's like
Mhm.
that's not the vibes we're going for. We're going for a princess and elegant. We don't need tacky. And like I love meeting the princesses like Cinderella in person in the parks, but I hate the feeling of the dress when like they go to hug you and you have to feel the top layer and it's like this feels so bad on the skin. Like why would they do this to her? She has to stay in that dress all day and it's not comfy.
All right. I think that about wraps up our Disney section. Let's move into her impact on pop culture. So there are around, give or take, 73 pieces of visual media in movies and adaptations for Cinderella. When I was looking at the list, there was not really anything on there that surprised me, like with Snow White last week with the Charmings from the 1980s. Like, what? How can I watch the whole thing? I'd really like to know. Inquiring minds would like to know. I feel like I was familiar with the list that I saw. There was some foreign language ones and some ones that it didn't really impact my life very much to know they existed. But I've definitely seen the most versions of Cinderella out of all the princesses because she has the most, like, literally any story. Because you can talk about the elements that make up a Cinderella story.
So you can debate this a little bit because I mean it depends on how much you want to boil it down to what are the main concepts that make up Cinderella. But like if you boil it down to the furthest point possible, it's about a girl or boy who is verbally or mentally abused by a relative of any kind and then their their inner traits are tested to the max during the peak of the story and then they always revert back to their true self of being kind-hearted. But like the part where you can like boil it down less is like does it have to have different like key features, like does it have to involve singing, which is most likely a no. That's mostly just for the movies.
Or Disney in particular. Because not very many retellings have music, except for like the poppy versions
Yeah,
that come after Hilary Duff.
the super like for kid versions of it or like for a whole family audience. I don't think it has to involve music. But one that is very questionable to me is does it have to have an animal in it? Because in all of the historical versions, like in all the different cultures, almost all of them include an animal, whether it's the mice, whether it's like a dragon, whether it's,
A fish.
yeah, a fish. It could be any kind of animal guide in there. So
Yeah.
I do think that one has to stick in there.
Yeah, I would agree. So that would mean Hilary Duff's version is not under our new definition of a
Yeah.
Cinderella story. There's not an animal in there. She just has her friend that does commercials for Zit Cream.
Yeah, under our definition of what having to include animals, it really isn't a Cinderella story. It's in Cinderella inspired story is more likely. But I also saw a few people trying to talk their way into what a girl wants being a Cinderella story, and I just don't get the Cinderella vibes from that one. Like, yeah, it meets the step family that is horrible to her, and then she gets tested at every turn, and then she ends up choosing herself. So it does meet that, but I just don't get the vibes from it.
Yeah, no, I when I watch What a Girl Wants, I never thought, "Oh, this is a Cinderella story."
I when I looked up like other people's like top 10 Cinderella films, I thought it was a mistake at first, and I was like, no, they're serious about this. They're defending their choices. And then I saw another person do it, and it's like, wow, that you think it's Cinderella, but I don't.
So one of my favorite versions, the one version that I could watch over and over again and never get tired of is Ever After with Drew Barrymore, which I mentioned earlier, because the English version of Cinderella is like closely related to it plot wise, not location wise, because the one that Drew Barrymore is in is still in France. But anyway,
My favorite version, besides that one, is probably Hilary Duff's Cinderella story because it's so relatable because they put it in a modern setting. And even though they're using like flip phones and old technology, at some point you have to consider if you're going to college or not for most people. So it ties in there, and then the like whole teenager life of not fitting in. Well, most people, I don't know if you're the popular kid, but I was not, and I could relate to that character a lot, but not the evil stepsister part.
for sure. I think the only thing that makes it not withstanding would be the technology, but I'm willing to look past that and say that it's a timeless movie. It's beautifully done. Like, I have no complaints about it at all. It's definitely one of my top favorites. And then another one that I like a lot is Ella Enchanted with the cool music. I like that one. It's funny.
I know they kind of get a bad rep, but I also like the other newer Cinderella stories, the one with like Selena Gomez and Sophia Carson. They have some like interesting parts in them, but they're also not something that I'm gonna watch like all the time. But I do watch them multiple times.
Yeah, I feel like I recently watched the Selena Gomez one again because it was on TV and I was like, what the heck? And like it's okay, but it's not as iconic as Hilary Duff's version, and that's all I'm gonna say. I love Selena Gomez and I respect her as an actress, but the follow ups to A Cinderella Story and Another Cinderella Story and the one with Lucy Hale and I just just don't understand.
I think the thing that really saved the Selena Gomez version one for me is that Drew Seeley was in it. And I loved his voice from High School Musical when Zac Efron used his voice in all the singing parts.
Zac Efron pulled an Ursula.
Yeah. So then when I saw that he got like a main role, I was like so excited to see the movie. And like I knew who Selena Gomez was, so I ended up liking it because I knew the actors and I really liked one of them.
Sure.
And then Sophia Carson, I don't know, there's just that one song that gets stuck in my head. But like the movie's not great. The that one song's good and everything else is kind of like wishy-washy.
So, I think now we can talk about, is Cinderella a good role model?
I would have to say yes.
Yeah, hands down, yes. Like, there's no version that exists where Cinderella isn't a good role model versus Snow White, when we were talking about her fairy tale version, was not, but the media versions usually are. Cinderella is overall a good, kind person. That's the point of her story. It's to show how being a kind person gets you further in life.
But you also have the argument that some people make about how she was more of a passive princess, and I don't agree with that. But I can also see where they're coming from if they don't look deeper into the story and just look at surface level. So, some people would say that she's a bad role model for that aspect, but I think she's a good one.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like officially called this, but I saw an article where it's talking about the Cheetah Girls anomaly and how the in the Cheetah Girls song Cinderella and how it's like, I don't want to be like Cinderella sitting in a dark old dusty cellar waiting for somebody. And I'm just like, I think y'all didn't watch the same movie I watched. Like Cinderella, if we're just gonna isolate the Disney version, the animated version, because I feel like that's what they were talking about, and Cinderella was waiting for a man to come save her. No, because like even Snow White was singing about someday my prince will come. Cinderella never even said that. She was like, "Oh, the prince is having a ball, or the palace is having a ball, and every eligible maiden is to attend." That wasn't even her intention in going.
She just wanted one single night of like normalcy. Every day in and out, she's taking care of her stepsisters and her stepmother, and she's wearing rags, just like whatever hand me downs they throw at her. And now comes a day where the king is asking for every eligible maiden, and she thinks she has a chance to actually wear nice clothes for once. She just wants to go dance. She wants to dress up. She wants to look nice. Everyone wants to do that every now and then.
And she wanted to be a part of her family. Like, she considers these people that are evil and abusive her family. And she just wants to be close with them. Like, she, despite all their flaws, for some reason she loves them. And she wants to be, treated as an equal because it's technically her house. Like, she grew up there. She was there before they were. Like, sure, the uh, Lady Tremaine inherited it in marriage, but still, like, it was Cinderella's house first, and they just were like, go away.
It's not like she could leave because it's super hard to leave abusers. Like, where would she go? She has nothing to her name.
Mm-hmm.
Literally just herself and the mice.
Yeah, because if we say it takes place in the 1600s when Charles Perrault was around, but 200 years ago, women didn't just get things. Even 100 years ago, women just didn't inherit things.
I mean, worse things could have happened to her if she left, because at least she knew these guys and that they wouldn't kill her. But if she left, it could be like any strange male could like accidentally kill her or purposely kill her. Maybe they would try to do other bad things to her. She has no clue, and all the memories are tied to her house. Like the she probably doesn't have any items from her parents from when they were alive because the step queen would probably take it. Well, stepmother, not queen. She's That's only in the third movie.
In other versions of the story, like her mother is buried on property. So it's a potentially her dad is buried on property too. So she wouldn't want to leave their graves either. But also if you want to talk about the black choker that she wears in the neck in the movie, that I was actually like long time ago when they were doing like impressionist paintings. I forgot the painter's name, but he would put the black chokers on the ballerinas. But also prostitutes wore black chokers and black ribbons around their neck. So, I mean, I'm not saying Disney did this because nobody really knows why they put a black choker on her, but it was a motif in like prostitution. So if she left, that could have been her fate.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that, and I should as an art major.
Disney a History, where both co hosts learn something new every week.
With cool fun facts.
Merchandise coming soon. Just kidding, it's not. Unless you want it, let us know.
We do have crickets.
That would be so funny if someone started requesting merchandise. I'd be like, sure.
Like, if you want it, yeah, we'll make it.
You want it, baby, you got it. But anyway, women didn't inherit things, and there was nowhere for her to go. She didn't have any other family members. So it wasn't, and her intention for going to the ball wasn't necessarily, it's not like it was off the table, but it wasn't her first thought was like, oh, maybe I can find a husband to get me out of this wretched place. No, she still considered Lady Tremaine, Gisela, and Anastasia her family.
Definitely. And you can see that in the second and third adaptations of it too.
Yeah. How quick she was to forgive them was
A little
remarkable.
too fast.
And if you read like the different historical versions, and some of them she like wants them punished, and then some versions she does forgive them immediately. So both things exist. Just whatever your heart desired, you go find your version of Cinderella. I prefer the forgiveness because in my mind she's forgiving them for herself, because who wants to hold on to that bitterness and, hatred? I don't. I try to forgive as often as I can.
I do think it would take a little bit longer for her to work out her emotions before fully forgiving them. But overall, I do think that she would forgive them.
Yeah. So overall, Sis is a good role model. And let's see. One of the questions I have for us to discuss is what do we like and dislike about her? I don't I don't think there's anything I dislike about her in the animated version.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything I dislike either.
Except maybe like the story. Like, why does every story have a foot fetish? Every version it has something to do with her feet, and I'm just like, ooh. But also, like we talked about when we were talking about the podcast, was foot binding, the ancient tradition of foot binding. Since the Chinese version is the oldest version, I'm wondering if that was somehow passed through the different languages. Tiny feet are considered beautiful somehow. I mean, they're not beautiful, but like I wouldn't call any feet beautiful. That's not my vibe.
Yeah, feet look kind of weird to me too. Like, I do see how smaller feet might be better than larger feet. Like, I mean, they're not something that like I want to personally look at, so the smaller the better, I guess.
Maybe that was it. They didn't like feet, so they're like, I want them small.
But she had tiny feet. It depends on what version you read, but some of them had her at like a size 4.5, and that's like a child's size.
Yeah. I mean, she's pretty petite in the animated film, but yeah. It's whatever. So the only thing I don't like about the stories is the foot fetish overlay. But other than that, I think all the historical versions are super cool to read about. We'll leave links to them on our Reddit, and eventually we'll get a website put up. But that's going to take a little bit of time for us to figure out what we want. We're still working on our logo and branding, so we'll see. So we like her. Nothing that we really dislike about her. And kind of a final wrap up question is, what would the world look like without Cinderella?
This one's really hard to answer because it's wrapped up in basically every culture. So it's like if we removed it, would it kind of like sever our ties a little bit between each culture? Or like would we have some other story take its place? It's hard to think about. There's so many different ways it could go.
Yeah, that was one of the things doing research earlier when I was getting ready. I was like, this is a common denominator in, I don't know, roughly 90% of cultures have a Cinderella story. That's crazy. It's this weird string that runs around the whole globe. I'm getting chills talking about it. It connects us. This story, this line that runs through is so beautiful. What? We're all connected? We're all one world? It's so cool. I love that it's so common, like a common story is goodness will prevail and evil will be, punished in a way.
And like the story probably took hold because of like the traders going around and everything back then. It was harder to get things around, like the stories with all the different languages, but they still like try to communicate. And the fact that the traders are probably the ones that took this everywhere. It's just wild that they got the story to literally almost everywhere. Where usually the stories would only reach certain places with like the certain places that each one would trade to. But the story was so catchy and memorable that everywhere was able to get this.
Mhm.
Thank the Phoenicians.
Yeah, if you can read this, thank the Phoenicians, guys. I think the world would look a little more disconnected without her. And I love that we have this in common as a globe. And I think that's just the coolest thing. And I think that wraps up this episode of Disney, a History. See you next time. Thank you for listening to Disney, a History. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. For further discussions, join us on our Reddit. For bonus content, you can find us on TikTok and YouTube. See you real soon!